It was just a few seconds. A flash of something in her eyes that didn't belong. Not when she was staring at my husband. Not when she was supposed to be my best friend. We were sitting on my patio that night, the three of us, sipping wine under the golden haze of the porch lights. Sierra was laughing at something Ethan said, a joke he'd told me 100 times before, and her hand lingered on his arm. Just a second too long. That second burned a hole in my memory. I didn't say anything at the time. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was tired, that maybe it had just looked worse than it was. But I felt it in my body, the way animals sense an earthquake before it happens. A slow shift beneath the surface. A quiet warning. And I ignored it. I wish I hadn't. Sierra and I had been inseparable since college. Roommates, soul sisters, partners in crime. She'd seen me through breakups, job changes, and family drama. When I met Ethan, she was the first person I introduced him to. "You found a good one," she'd said, smiling at me, glass of Chardonnay in her hand. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't smiling at me. She was looking through me, already measuring what she wanted. But back then, she was my person. I never questioned her loyalty. She'd been with me when I cried over cheating exes and celebrated my engagement like it was her own. She even helped me pick out my wedding dress. How do you go from that to this? The first real sign came in the form of a message. It was a Tuesday night, and Ethan had fallen asleep early on the couch. I was grabbing his phone to put it on the charger when I saw a text notification pop up. "Sierra, don't forget what you promised." Winky face, lol. My heart froze. What promise? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over it, torn between invading his privacy and preserving my peace of mind. I put the phone down. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I casually asked Ethan if he and Sierra had talked recently. "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "She texted me some dumb joke about a movie we saw at your birthday thing." "Why?" I smiled. Just wondering. He wasn't lying exactly. But he wasn't telling the whole truth either. That wink emoji haunted me all day. The next weekend, Sierra came over again. We were planning a girls' trip to Sedona, something we'd dreamed about for years. While I made cocktails, she and Ethan talked on the couch. I glanced over. She was laughing too hard, sitting too close, her body angled toward him. And Ethan, sweet, oblivious Ethan, was either too polite or too clueless to notice. When I handed her a drink, she winked at me. "Still making those dangerous margaritas, huh?" she teased. "Still drinking them like water, huh?" I smiled tightly. She laughed again. Too loud. Too high-pitched. Like she was performing. I hated how fake it suddenly felt. Like I was watching strangers act out a scene in my living room. Later that night, Ethan went to bed early again. Said he had a headache. Sierra and I stayed up, talking like we always did. But something had shifted. The air between us wasn't warm anymore. It was sharp. She was lounging on the couch, swirling the last of her wine. "You ever wonder what it's like being married to someone else?" she asked, eyes on the ceiling. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, like if we'd made different choices. Chosen different people." "Are you unhappy with James?" I asked carefully. Her boyfriend of 2 years was quiet, a little boring, but dependable. She shrugged. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I settled." I raised an eyebrow. "And what? Ethan didn't settle?" She smirked. "Oh, please. Ethan hit the jackpot with you. You know that." But something in her tone made my skin crawl. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Ethan snored beside me. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was misreading everything. But the signs were piling up. I remembered the wedding. How Sierra had insisted on doing a speech, even though I hadn't asked her to. She stood in front of our guests and said things like, "I always told Maddie not to let this one get away, and if she didn't marry him, I would have." Everyone laughed. But I remembered feeling weird. Like she meant it. I started to notice things after that. Tiny things. A perfume scent on Ethan's shirt after he hugged her goodbye. Inside jokes they shared that I wasn't part of. Her casually mentioning Ethan's favorite restaurant, when I knew I never told her. One night, she showed up with his favorite bourbon for both of us, even though she didn't drink dark liquor. "Just a little thank you," she said. "Thank you for what?" I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. So, I started watching, listening, paying attention. One afternoon, while Sierra and I were shopping, she got a call from a number she quickly silenced. She looked flustered. I glanced down and saw the contact name just before it disappeared.
E.
My blood turned to ice. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice light.
"Yeah, just James," she said.
Too fast. He's being annoying. But James's name didn't start with E. I felt like I was living in a psychological thriller, except I was the one piecing the clues together, and no one believed me. I couldn't talk to Ethan. What would I say? "Hey, your wife's best friend might be in love with you. By the way, did you flirt back?" I didn't want to push him away. I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. But the knot in my stomach was getting tighter by the day. And Sierra? She was getting bolder. The final straw came 2 weeks later. We were hosting a small dinner party, just a few friends, nothing fancy. I was in the kitchen, plating appetizers, when I walked in and saw Sierra leaning against Ethan's arm. Not just touching him, clutching him. He was laughing at something she said, trying to pull his arm away, but she held on, fingers brushing the inside of his wrist. When she saw me, she didn't even flinch. She smiled. Sweetly. Like nothing was wrong. Like she owned the room. Like she was testing me. That night, after everyone left, I asked Ethan if he noticed anything strange about Sierra lately. He looked confused. Like what? Like, I don't know. Has she ever said anything weird to you?
He frowned.
She's always weird. But no, not really.
Why?
I hesitated. Then I chickened out. Nothing. Just wondering. He kissed my forehead and said I was overthinking again. Maybe I was. But maybe I wasn't. Because the next morning, I opened my inbox and found something that made my hand shake. An anonymous email. No subject. No signature. Just one sentence. "You might want to check the messages on Ethan's old iPad. The one you both forgot to log out of." My stomach dropped. And that was when everything started to unravel. The iPad was buried in the bottom drawer of our bedroom dresser, underneath some old tax documents and forgotten headphones. Ethan hadn't used it in over a year, ever since he upgraded to a newer model. I had forgotten it even existed. But I hadn't forgotten our Apple ID was still logged in. My fingers trembled as I powered it on, praying the battery had enough life left. The Apple logo blinked at me like an omen, and my reflection in the dark screen looked like a stranger, tense, hollow-eyed, afraid. When the home screen finally lit up, I opened the Messages app. And there it was. A whole conversation thread between Ethan and Sierra. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe an old thread from months ago, something flirty, maybe, but easy to explain away. What I found was worse. So much worse. There were jokes, inside jokes I'd never heard. Mentions of songs they liked. Memories they couldn't talk about in front of Maddie. Late-night messages time-stamped past midnight. And then there were the compliments. "Sierra, you're seriously the only man I can actually have a real conversation with. Everyone else is just dull. Ethan, you always say that when you've had wine, lol. Sierra, I say it when it's true. I've been thinking about that night at Maddie's birthday. You remember what you said? Ethan, don't remind me. I was tipsy. Sierra, you said you wondered what it would have been like if we'd met first. I think about that a lot." My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. The betrayal wasn't just the words. It was the casualness, the playfulness. Like this was some game they both knew how to play. I kept scrolling. More messages. Some seemingly innocent, others laced with dangerous undertones. "Sierra, I tried on that red dress again. The one you said looked dangerous. Ethan, you're trouble, you know that? Sierra, only for you.
Don't tell Maddie."
That one nearly made me scream. I stared at it for a long time, my ears ringing. I felt like I had left my own body, hovering in the room, watching myself unravel in real time. And yet I kept going. because I had to know how far it had gone. There were no nude pictures. No sexting. Nothing explicit that crossed a hard line, at least not digitally. But emotional cheating? That line had been crossed and burned. I checked the dates. Some messages were from months ago. Others as recent as 2 days earlier. And that message I saw on Ethan's phone, the one Sierra sent with a wink, was in this thread too. She had asked him to cover for her when she left James's house one night. Told him she'd said she was going to see Maddie. My name was being used as a cover for her lies. I was the alibi.
The fool.
The pawn. I wanted to confront him, storm into the living room, throw the iPad at his feet, and scream, "Explain this." But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was that little voice inside me whispering, "You're not ready to hear the truth out loud." So I put the iPad away. And I made a different choice. I started pretending. Pretending everything was normal. Pretending I hadn't seen those messages. Pretending I wasn't sleeping next to a man whose loyalty I now questioned deeply. Because if I played my cards right, I could catch them both. And give Sierra the shock of her life. The first thing I did was change the lock screen on the iPad to a photo of me and Ethan, smiling, arms wrapped around each other in front of a Christmas tree. I left it just barely visible on the dresser, next to the jewelry box.
Bait.
Then I waited for Sierra to come over again. She arrived 2 days later, all sunshine and smiles, like nothing had ever happened. Hugged me tight, kissed my cheek, complimented my dress. Fake, fake, fake. I watched her eyes flicker to the iPad. She didn't say anything, but I saw the tension in her jaw.
Good.
That night, I invited her to stay for dinner. Ethan grilled steaks. We drank wine, laughed, played cards, just like the good old days. Except now, I was watching every move. The way she leaned toward Ethan when he spoke. The way her foot brushed his under the table. The way Ethan didn't pull away fast enough. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled. Because this was no longer a friendship. This was a game. And I was going to win. After dinner, Sierra stepped into the bathroom, and I followed quietly to the hallway. I heard her open the drawer. I waited. When she came out, her expression was smooth, but her pupils were slightly wider. Her breathing a little faster. She'd seen the iPad.
She knew I knew.
But she wasn't going to admit it. Not yet. That weekend, I asked my cousin Rachel, who worked as a freelance photographer, to help me stage a photo shoot. Make us look in love, I told her. But not stiff. Natural. Like we're newlyweds again. She raised an eyebrow. Trouble in paradise? I smiled. Something like that. Ethan didn't object. He actually seemed happy to do it. Clueless. Or maybe guilty. I couldn't tell anymore. We spent an afternoon at the lake, smiling, kissing, holding hands, Rachel snapping away. I picked the best photos, filtered them carefully, and posted them to my Instagram. Caption, 5 years married, and still my favorite person in the world. Within minutes, Sierra liked it. And 10 minutes later, she texted me. Sierra, you two are too cute. Seriously. I'm jealous, LOL. Jealous. Good. Let her feel what I felt. But that wasn't enough. I needed her to crack. So I set a trap. I invited her to brunch at the same place Ethan and I had our first date. I made sure she knew that. I just feel like we need some girl time again, I said sweetly. Like the old days. She agreed, of course. That morning, I wore the same dress I wore the day Ethan proposed. Bright yellow. Fitted. Beautiful. She wore red. Of course she did. We clinked glasses. Laughed. Ordered mimosas. And then I dropped the first match. So, I've been thinking about doing a vow renewal, I said casually. Something small. Just family and a few close friends. Her face twitched. That's fast, isn't it? You just had your anniversary. I smiled. It's more symbolic. You know, recommitting. Sealing the next chapter. She sipped her drink. Sounds lovely. Of course, I added. You'd be my maid of honor again. Who else would it be? She looked trapped.
Oh, sure.
Of course.
Got you.
When we hugged goodbye, she didn't hold me like she used to. There was stiffness there.
Coldness.
She was unraveling, and I could feel it. That night, she messaged Ethan again. Sierra, why is she acting like everything's perfect? Did she say something to you? Ethan, no. She's been really sweet lately, actually. I think she's planning something. Sierra, yeah, for us maybe. That message was the tipping point. The way she said us. I needed to confront Ethan. But I needed to be strategic.
Calm.
Unshakable. So the next morning, I made him breakfast in bed. We talked. We laughed. I kissed him on the forehead. Then I held up the iPad and said quietly, I need you to read something. Ethan's face was still warm from the morning sun pouring in through the blinds. He had that sleep-softened look, his dark hair sticking up slightly, coffee steaming on the tray in front of him. And then I handed him the iPad. The exact same device he probably forgot existed. At first, he looked confused. Then he opened the Messages app. Then he saw her name. His breath hitched so slightly I almost missed it, but I didn't. His hands trembled. And for a long, thick moment he said nothing. I let the silence stretch, daring him to be the first one to speak. I don't know what this is, he finally muttered, his voice too quiet. Don't insult me, Ethan, I said calmly. You do. He opened his mouth like he wanted to spin a story, but I could see the panic swirling in his eyes. The mental scramble. The realization that he had nowhere to hide. I had read the messages. I knew everything. Well, he finally said. We were just talking. You know how Sierra is.
She jokes.
She's always flirted a little. I tilted my head. So you thought it was okay?
No.
I just didn't want to make it awkward. I didn't encourage her. Well, not like that.
I mean,
she asked you what your life would have been like if you met her first, Ethan. I said, my voice still calm, still level. You called her trouble. She told you not to tell me. He rubbed his face, dragging his fingers down his jaw like he could wipe away the shame. It never got physical, he said quickly. I swear. Nothing happened. I didn't blink. I never asked if it did. He froze. And that was when it hit him. This wasn't about what happened. This was about who he became. I stood from the bed and walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The sound of birds chirping in the distance felt like a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside me. I loved you, I said. I trusted you with every corner of my heart. I know, he said. I messed up. But Maddie, please, you know I love you. I didn't mean for it to get that far. I turned, finally letting my anger rise. You didn't mean to get caught. He flinched. I walked over and picked up my phone. He watched me, eyes wide. What are you doing? Sending her a message. Wait. Too late.
Me. You might want to sit down, Sierra.
He just confessed everything. No reply. Not yet. But I knew she saw it. Her read receipts were still on. Always had been. Ethan looked like a man on the edge. Maddie, please don't blow this up. Don't go public. Don't turn it into some huge drama. Can we just work through this? You want me to pretend like nothing happened? I asked. So, you can keep me and your emotional side chick too? He shook his head, lips parting, but no words came out. Because he knew. There was no talking his way out. That afternoon, I went to my sister's house and stayed the night. I needed time to think.
To breathe.
To not scream every time I replayed their messages in my mind. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next day, I returned home. Ethan was sitting on the couch, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept. I ignored him. Instead, I pulled up my email and started drafting something new, an invitation. A vow renewal ceremony. But not just any ceremony. It was going to be one night only, with a very special guest list. And Sierra? She'd be front row. Over the next 2 weeks, I staged everything perfectly. Venue, a quiet rooftop garden downtown. Theme, new beginnings. Dress, a white satin gown with gold lace trim, symbolic, beautiful, and cutting. Every detail was chosen with precision. Ethan kept asking if I was sure. If this was my way of healing, of moving forward. And I lied. I smiled and told him yes. Because if he wanted to pretend we were fine, then I'd let him live in that fantasy. Until the very last second. The night of the vow renewal. Everything looked perfect. Candles lined the aisle. Soft music played. Guests mingled with champagne. Sierra arrived in a short black cocktail dress, smiling tight, her hair freshly done. She hugged me like nothing had ever happened. "Can't believe you pulled this together so fast," she whispered. I smiled, unblinking. "Oh, I've been planning it for a while." She didn't understand. Not yet. But she would. The ceremony began. I walked down the aisle alone. No bouquet, no bridal party. Ethan stood waiting in a black suit. He looked nervous. Not because of guilt, but because something about me had shifted and he felt it. I stood beside him, looked at the officiant, and held up my hand. "Before we begin," I said loudly, clearly, "I have something to say." The crowd went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I turned to face everyone. "There's no vow renewal tonight," I said. "Not in the traditional sense." I looked directly at Sierra. "Instead, this is my vow, to myself." Murmurs rippled across the rooftop. I turned back to Ethan. "I vowed 5 years ago to love, honor, and respect you. And I did. I gave you everything. My heart, my trust, my loyalty." His eyes widened. "Maddie." "Don't interrupt." He swallowed hard. I continued. "But somewhere along the way, you forgot what that meant. You started entertaining someone else's affection, letting her get too close, making me the punchline in a private joke I never asked to be a part of."
Gasps.
Whispers. Sierra froze, face turning ghostly white. I stepped toward her. "And you, my best friend. You crossed boundaries, flirted with my husband behind my back, and thought I was too blind to notice." Sierra's mouth opened. "I never." "Don't lie. You lied enough already." The air was electric. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at their phones. Others stared at me, unmoving. I walked to the center of the aisle and pulled out my phone. "Now, if anyone wants proof." I tapped the screen. A slideshow appeared on the projector behind us. Messages. Screenshots.
Photos of the iPad.
Evidence. Every
single thing.
Sierra gasped audibly. Ethan stepped forward, trying to stop me, but a friend held him back. "Let her finish," she said. I stood tall. "This isn't about revenge," I said, my voice steady. "This is about truth. About not letting betrayal hide behind pretty smiles and fake hugs." I looked out at everyone. "I won't be renewing any vows tonight." I took off my ring. "I'll be making new ones with myself. To never settle for half-truths. To protect my peace. And to walk away when respect is no longer mutual." I dropped the ring into Ethan's hand and walked out. Outside, the city lights blinked like stars. And for the first time in weeks, I felt clean.
Free.
Whole. Behind me, chaos erupted. Sierra shouting, Ethan chasing, guests stunned. But I kept walking, because this was my power. And they would never see it coming again. 2 days later, my phone rang at 6:41 a.m. Caller ID, Sierra. I didn't pick up. 1 minute later, a text followed.
"Maddie,
you humiliated me. You didn't have to do it like that." Then another. "You should have just talked to me privately. We were friends. You owe me that." And one more. "Do you know what people are saying about me now? I lost a client. Someone actually called me a homewrecker at Starbucks." I stared at the screen, then typed back. "You flirted with my husband, behind my back, and thought I wouldn't find out." Then I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. No more of her. But it wasn't over. Because Ethan wasn't letting go so easily either. He showed up at my sister's house. Flowers in one hand. That broken, pitiful look in the other. "Maddie," he whispered as I opened the door.
"Please.
Just hear me out." I crossed my arms. "You had your chance to speak. At the vow renewal. I didn't know you'd do that. No, I said. You didn't know I had the strength to. His jaw tightened just slightly. I could tell he was trying to be patient, measured, polite.
Fake.
I made a mistake, he said. But I never cheated. I never touched her. I never even kissed her. Doesn't that count for something? You shared emotional intimacy with her. You shared inside jokes. You said things to her you never said to me. That is betrayal, Ethan. And you did it while sleeping in my bed. He opened his mouth to argue, but shut it again. Because he knew. I'm willing to go to therapy, he said finally. Counseling. Anything. I don't want to lose us. I studied his face. Part of me still wanted to believe he was the man I fell in love with. But another part of me, the stronger, louder, wiser part, knew better. Why now? I asked. Why didn't you think of therapy when she first messaged you? I didn't think it was serious, he said, voice shaking. I didn't know it would go that far. That's exactly the problem. I didn't invite him in. I let him walk back to his car, flowers still in his hands, shoulders hunched under the weight of his own actions. But inside I was unraveling. Not because I missed him, but because I had to confront the truth. I had ignored the signs for years. Sierra's possessiveness, Ethan's subtle withdrawal, the jokes that never felt funny, the glances that lingered too long. All the dots I refused to connect. Until now. That evening, I pulled out a box from the closet. Inside were old photographs, wedding cards, anniversary gifts. Ethan's notes. Sierra's little handmade birthday cards. Tokens of a time I once thought was golden. I sat on the floor and slowly, methodically, burned them one by one in the fireplace. Every flame was a piece of closure. Every flicker, freedom. I cried. Not for Ethan. Not even for Sierra. But for the woman I used to be. The one who didn't know better. A week passed. Then two. Then one morning, I received a call from Ethan's mother. Madeline, she said gently, he's devastated. I stayed silent. He hasn't left his apartment. He told me everything. I know he made a huge mistake, but he's still my son. I exhaled. I understand. And I'm sorry he's in pain. But this is something he has to feel. It's how we learn. She sighed, the weight of a mother's love pressing against the boundaries of fairness. Do you think there's any hope? No, I said, softly but firmly. I don't. That night, I received an email. From Sierra. Subject line. If I could go back. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Maddie. I don't know what to say other than I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get that far. I was lonely. You were always so confident, so loved. I envied you. I never thought Ethan would even respond the way he did. But once he did, it felt exciting. I crossed a line. I know. And I lost something I can never get back. I understand if you hate me. I just needed you to know. None of it was about you being not enough. It was about me not being whole. I'm going to start over somewhere else. This town has a long memory. I wish I'd been a better friend.
Sierra.
I read it once. Then again. I didn't respond. Because some apologies are meant for the mirror. A month later, Ethan showed up one last time. This time, he didn't beg. He just stood outside my new apartment, holding a letter. I know you won't take me back, he said. But I wrote this so you'd understand how much I ruined. I didn't open it in front of him. I waited until midnight. And as I read it under a single dim lamp, I realized. He did love me. In his own limited way. But love without boundaries is dangerous. Love without discipline is reckless. Love without respect isn't love at all. It wasn't until I met someone new, months later, casually, slowly, that I realized just how deep the wounds had gone. But this time, I didn't lead with trust. I led with standards. And whoever couldn't meet them would never be invited in. I thought the hardest part would be confronting the betrayal. But I was wrong. The hardest part came after, when everything was quiet, when no one was calling, when the fire of anger had burned out and all that remained were ashes. Silence can be a brutal teacher. You see, once you remove the people who harm you, the next step is facing yourself. And I had a lot to face. Why did I let it go on for so long? Why didn't I speak up when Sierra made those inappropriate comments, disguised as jokes? Why did I downplay Ethan's emotional absence, pretending it was just a busy season or normal marriage stuff? The truth? I was scared. Scared of rocking the boat. Scared of what I'd find if I pulled the thread. But now the whole sweater had unraveled, and I stood in the cold truth. I moved into a small, sunlit apartment across town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft, muted green. Bought a new couch. Got rid of the bed Ethan and I had shared for 10 years. Donated the old dishes. Replaced the framed wedding photo with a photo of me at the beach, smiling alone. Not lonely. Alone. And at peace. 2 months later, I heard a knock at the door. Not Ethan.
Not Sierra.
It was Kelsey, one of my oldest college friends who had moved away years ago. We hadn't spoken in a long time. I saw what happened on Facebook, she said, stepping in. And honestly, I was shocked, but also weirdly proud of you. I laughed bitterly. Proud? You never stood up for yourself when we were in college, she said. Remember freshman year? You let your roommate steamroll you for 8 months. I rolled my eyes. God, I forgot about that.
I didn't, she said.
Because I always wondered when you'd realize your power. We drank coffee that day on my new balcony and talked for 5 hours. And that was the start of something unexpected. I rebuilt slowly. Made new friends. Joined a local women's support group. Started journaling every night, raw, unfiltered, sometimes ugly. And slowly, I began to forgive myself. Because the truth is, healing isn't always a loud explosion. Sometimes it's just waking up one day and not checking your ex's Instagram. Not rereading old messages. Not wishing for closure. Sometimes healing is finally enjoying a Saturday without wondering if someone's lying to you.
But the twist?
It came 3 months later. I was at Trader Joe's, minding my business, when I heard a voice behind me. Maddie. I turned. It was Noah, Ethan's best friend. The only person who had defended me when everything came out. He'd messaged me after the vow renewal, something simple like, "You did the right thing. You deserve better." We hadn't spoken since. Now here he was in gym clothes with almond milk and bananas in his basket. I smiled. "Hey, stranger."
You look good, he said.
Peaceful. Yeah, I feel peaceful. We ended up grabbing lunch that day. Nothing romantic. Just catching up. But it was easy. Natural. Free from the weight of drama. I told him how I'd moved, how I was trying new things, how I was learning to set boundaries. How I'd stopped being the version of myself who always put others first. And he smiled and said, "It suits you." 3 weeks later, he asked me to dinner. I said yes. Not because I was ready for something serious, but because for the first time in a long time, someone saw me as I was now, not as the woman who'd been betrayed. And then came the final twist. One evening, I got a message on Facebook from an account I didn't recognize. Megan L. The message was short. "You don't know me, but I'm the woman Sierra replaced you with. I thought you should know she did it again. This time with my boyfriend."
My heart sank. But then?
It didn't sting. It didn't ache. It felt distant, like hearing a sad story about someone you once knew in another lifetime. I closed the app, and I whispered aloud. Some people never change. But I did. The next day, I went to the beach, sat on the sand, watching the waves. And I realized the shock I gave Sierra wasn't the vow renewal. It wasn't the flowers. It wasn't the public humiliation. It was choosing myself. It was walking away without setting fire to everything. It was surviving without bitterness. And that's the kind of shock most people never see coming. She tried to ruin my marriage, but in the end, she gave me back myself.